Should do it. Hey everyone. I'm just gonna get everything opened up while I start getting ready to do the processing. Okay, I'm gonna give it like 2 more minutes and then I think I'll start processing, if that works for everyone.
That's for me.
Awesome. Alright.
Are we streaming or recording this somewhere?
I think it should be recording on OBS. I tried it out earlier today, and it should record everything with the full resolution.
Great, nice.
Let's see. I feel like I said 4 accidentally somewhere. But I'll wait for a couple more people to show up because I know a lot of people wanted to see this, and then we can get started. Yeah, I'm just gonna go over the data real quick. So I had a list of everything to go through, and I just want to remember. Okay, so I think I can get started processing now. There is a lot of linear stuff, so if you know what you're doing in linear, this probably won't be the interesting part, apart from the H-alpha subtraction, but it's just a good overall workflow. So also big thanks to Justin for this data, it was really fun. But starting out, we just have, this is just the pure RGB data that I've combined, and it's plate solved, and then I've unplate solved Loom and H-alpha. And so the first thing we wanted to do is just look at the noise scales in all of the images to see if we actually need to do denoise, because this is really clean data. And so for RGB, looking closely, there doesn't seem to be much chrominance data or noise at all, which is quite nice. The only issue, which you can see here with the stars, is that they're rainbow. But we can use scripts later on to try to fix some of that hue discoloration around the stars, especially since we want to preserve their color for the final image. For Loom, again, there's a little bit of noise, but it's honestly quite fine. So the biggest issue for Loom here is going to be that basically all of the star cores are clipped, and so dealing with that to create a much better image is going to be our main focus. And then for H-alpha, there is noise, and as you'll see later on, there also is a bit of a gradient. And so the way of dealing with that gradient is going to be interesting and hopefully pretty helpful. But yeah, Starting with RGB, I don't really see any reason to do any noise reduction because there basically is no noise. And so MMT wouldn't do much, and most AI noise algorithms, you'd just be losing data at that point. So I'll just go ahead and put a preview in the darkest spot. I mean, this technically really isn't correct because you're supposed to use black sky, but it's so close up that there's not really a black reference anywhere, and I don't want to turn the brown dust lanes black. So we can always just increase the upper limit because I verified manually there are no stars there. Right, and then we'll just use SPCC. I found that for N31 that sometimes these don't work so well, and so just using the Astrodon series, even though it's not the correct filter, it sometimes gives a better broadband bandpass for close galaxies. And then we can just run SPCC really quickly. But there's one problem with SPCC here, and it's that if I get rid of the STF, you'll see all of the star cores that are bright are clipped to purple, which obviously isn't that optimal because if we saturate stars, all the cores are going to be purple. So I'll just save this really quick because my computer might crash. But I'm going to use a script called repaired HSV separation. And what that does is it just splits the channels into HSV and V and then repairs the SV and H values so that there's no cliff drop-off points. And you don't want V to be repaired because you do want the center part of the star to still be white. And so how I'll use this script is I'll just find the dimmest star with a clipped core, which I think from my memory was this one. And the B value is about 0.5 as it's the lowest value. And so we'll open up the script again and we'll put in like maybe slightly lower than 0.5, like 0.47 should work fine. And then the stars are quite large compared to the image. So if we increase the max repair radius, that will ensure that every clipped pixel gets fixed. The script's finished, and I'll just show you what it does. If we just combine the repaired HSV and unrepaired V channels, then you'll see that the clip star core is completely fixed. All it does is it just interpolates over the edge values in the center using, I think it might be even convolution and then deconvolution. I'm not entirely sure. But now we have this fixed image, and so the next thing to do is actually just rerun SPCC on it, because the fixed stars now add value to SPCC. And there shouldn't be much of a difference at all, but it's still just important to run it just in case. Okay. So that's our RGB color image fixed. And we can forget about that for now. So I'll put HA over here because we'll focus on it later. But now Loom and RGB are in roughly the same state, as in they're background subtracted. There weren't gradients, so they're not really background subtracted, but they have no background gradients. They're correctly color calibrated. In the case of Loom, not calibrated at all because you don't need to do that. And there's no noise reduction needed to be done. So now I'll just apply BlurX. Now I find that the default settings are really, really aggressive for star size. Like, I'll show you what I mean. In that they make the image look almost fake. And so usually the best way to combat that is to just increase star halos and don't sharpen the stars as much, because that gives the illusion that you're still losing some detail to atmospheric disturbance while you still gain the non-stellar detail from BlurX. And you'll see throughout that keeping the stars sharp and wide is extremely important because it takes focus off of the noise of the image. And so you can get away with either a super noise reduced image that has not a lot of small scale detail, or an image that has too much noise if you put more focus on the stars. Okay, so if you can see what I mean, flipping back and forth, yes, everything's been sharpened, but we've completely lost the wider scale detail in these stars. Like, this isn't really real. And also, you can start to see a bit of star color being muted. That's not good. So we're going to increase the star halos to maybe like 0.16 and decrease the sharpened stars to also around 0.16. That's usually the spot I like, and we're going to try to rerun it again and see what happens. Sorry this takes a while. My computer's kind of slow with everything running right now. But yeah, the other important thing is that you apply the same BlurX process to Loom and RGB, because otherwise, or just convolute RGB and then fix the stars later, because otherwise you're going to have a mismatch in the chrominance and detail, and that will look weird at smaller scales. Okay, so we can still see that BlurX is not having a fun time with the fact that Andromeda is made out of stars, which you can see with all of these weird sharpening artifacts. But that's honestly fine, because Loom will take care of that. I don't think it had as much trouble with Loom when I was processing this before. So we can just run BlurX on the image. It'll take a little bit. And then the next step will just be, of course, to run BlurX on Loom. And then we can start to process basically the RGB image. But we're going to want to hold off on really truly getting started on the processing non-linearly, because we're going to need the H-alpha to compare to every step so that we can really show the central core of H-alpha in this image. But so far it's all like preliminary, pretty basic stuff. Then, while we're waiting, I guess I can start explaining my methodology for H-alpha subtraction, which we'll see later. But the main problem for galaxies like these is that the H-alpha continuum line varies between younger and older stars, which honestly shouldn't be much of a problem, and it isn't. But if you want to get like a really truly perfect H-alpha subtraction, you have to vary the constant K, or if you're doing a linear fit, where you put the linear fit boxes throughout the image. But the good thing is that we can model the glow of the stars and therefore basically their stellar populations using just an MMT mask. And of course it won't be perfect, but we'll get a much more even distribution of the subtraction. And so you won't over or under subtract the core when you're trying to tracked outer regions. But yeah, oh, this is taking a while. And then another nice trick is that if you don't like how the BlurX stars work, you can always just create a new image and only work on the BlurX stars to do your star addition. Because when you turn off non-stellar adjustments, it gets like 50 or 60% faster. Okay, so that's BlurX on RGB. And we can verify that it didn't do anything bad to the core by just de-stretching really quickly. And it looks alright. I mean, people can argue about the detail, but it does look really sharp and nice. So there's that. And then we'll just quickly apply the same thing to Loom. This should hopefully be a little bit faster than the 3 minutes. But then after this, we're just going to very barely stretch Loom and RGB to do an LRGB combination. And then we'll shift our focus to H alpha. And so looking a little forward, the most important part of LRGB combination is exactly matching the brightness of the Loom and the RGB. Because the way that Pixinsight HaLRGB is designed is that you're supposed to have like a 0.01 tolerance between the two images, which isn't great. It does preserve detail and color a lot more when you have it correct, but when you don't, you get the characteristic loss of saturation. But there is a really neat trick to getting a perfect stretch for a Loom when you're adding to RGB. And luckily after this, basically all of the neural net procedures will be done. So we won't have to wait that long anymore. But yeah, any questions so far? Okay, it's almost done. And then after this, we're just going to separate the stars and the galaxy using StarNet. It's really not the best process to use because we're going to lose all of those bright pockets in M31, but with careful readdition and MMT, you can get the relative brightnesses back quite accurately, which is always nice.
Do you mean we're gonna lose some kind of linear fit between the processing of your star list and the stars?
No, I barely ever use linear fit now.
Okay, but it's a level adjustment thing that will occur. Or
What?
did I not get it? When you say we're gonna need to adjust the stars.
I can't do that with that in the background. I'm so done with the front fight.
Normally, when I adjust the stars, and then it's when the stars have been separated using StarNet, and so I can just use histogram transformation and stretch both and add. Linear fit isn't too good, I feel, unless you're doing narrowband stuff. Sorry?
What is it then?
I think there is some echo or something.
Ah, gotcha. Alright. Okay, so now we're just going to do a pretty quick StarNet on these two images. And hopefully this takes shorter. Okay, yeah, it won't take long. And then when we stretch an image like this, you basically only want to use histogram transformation because that preserves local contrast much better than anything else, and then you can control large-scale contrast with MMT or HDR or LHE or whatever really you want. But using histogram transformation really helps the bright edges, but it's important not to blow out any bright features before LRGB combination. Also, if you have any questions, just shout them out while I'm processing.
Actually, I've got a question about StarNet.
Yeah.
You're using, it's saying using STF parameter set by user to stretch the image.
Yeah.
Does it normally say that whenever you run StarNet?
So when you run it on linear mode,
It's not a toy.
it uses the STF that you put into the image. So sometimes it's helpful if you have stars that are really, really bright, you can lower the STF manually and then run StarNet on linear. But
Okay.
yeah, this is also StarNet 2, so it might be different than the original
it.
StarNet.
Got it. Thanks.
You got it. Okay. So that's our RGB stars image, this is our RGB image, and then we'll run StarNet again quickly on Loom.
Why not bump up the stride?
Sorry?
That speed up things. Why not bump up the stride on StarNet too? It'll speed up a little bit.
This is the highest stride. If lowering the stride to like 156 will make it slower.
No, it's 384 now in the latest version. It's not.
Oh, I haven't updated. I helped the guy make it, and I'm just too lazy to actually put it all on my computer now. It's fine. When I process alone, like I'll use 256 because it's slightly better for dense star fields, which I usually have. But it's mostly because I don't have a GPU on this because it's a laptop. Well, hopefully it's a little faster on mono. It should be at least. Okay, and as soon as this finishes, then we can get to the more fun part of processing. This is just like the boring linear neural networks.
Still learning things, not boring for me.
That's good. Thanks.
Unfortunately, StarNet just can only run so fast without a GPU. Even with
Yeah.
a GPU, it's still long.
All right, there we go. Okay. So now what we want to do is just very quickly do an LRGB combination on Lumen RGB. So what I'll just do is open histogram transformation and basically stretch it until I feel that it's non-linear, but I'm also not losing detail in the core. Like, this would be too far. This is not enough of a stretch. Something like this is good. Where you can still see the core and just barely the dust lanes around it, but it's also a non-linear image now. And likewise, we want to stretch Loom. And the best way to stretch Loom, oh, that's not the best way, one sec, is to extract the luminance image from the RGB and then try and use STF on the actual Loom to match it. Now, obviously, StarNet has messed up the Loom core a little bit, but it'll be fine because it's bright if no one really notices. So I can see we need to clip a little bit and darken it. So all I'm doing is just trying not to clip the Loom image while getting a good and very similar stretch. So it looks like I need to clip maybe slightly more. But I feel like this might be clipping the histogram at this point, so we can just preview if it does. And no, we're good for maybe a little bit more. Like, this also, it doesn't clip anything, and it's quite accurate to the stretch. Maybe a little bit more of a clip. Okay, and that's basically perfect. And if we look, the stretch is basically identical. So if we just apply that histogram transformation, then we have our stretched Loom. And this is just the best way of getting an even LRGB combination. And then we can just run LRGB combination with the default settings. Okay. And you can see there's like, here, there's basically no loss of color. The detail is the exact same. We've just decreased the noise a bit. So that was a successful LRGB combination. Okay, so now it's time for the fun H-alpha continuum subtraction. So let's get started on that. First, I'm just going to open, or reopen, I would say, the raw RGB data. The reason I'm doing this is because sometimes color calibration can affect the linearity of, and also StarNet can affect the linearity of some of the color channels, and so I want the pure red channel, like the raw red channel. And then I can just do a basic channel combination to create my HRR image. and combine. And then we'll do an unlinked STF to show off what this really does. So what this image does is it assumes everything in red and everything white here is basically pure continuum. And so only the H alpha regions will stand out in red. So we can close H alpha in red. And then now what we want to do is just a very, very basic color calibration. We'll use the same location I used for the RGB image. And now operating off the assumption that all of these stars are basically emitting pure broadband and they won't have any H alpha spikes, which is a logical assumption, I would say. We can calibrate the white reference, making sure not to check structure detection. And let's increase the limits to 1.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Could we use the entire image as a white reference?
No, for a couple of reasons.
Okay.
One is that the Milky Way stars are going to have a slightly different white balance than Andromeda, and so you're going to get over and under subtraction. And the second is that we don't want to use structure detection. We don't want any of these stars, and we want to generalize. We don't want to generalize the individual H alpha light, which I'll show you later. We're going to subtract for different parts of the region, and then add those images together at the end.
Okay.
This is just a very basic channel balancing. I mean, you probably could have used linear fit, but it would have been worse. But this is really just a basic channel balancing. So I can run BlurX on the default settings again, because now we don't care about H alpha stars. We just want the nebulosity to be nice and sharp. So I need to run BlurX and then StarX on this HRR image. The reason yeah, go for it.
Just real quick, is there any reason why you're going to be using Star Exterminator now versus using StarNet earlier?
RGB? I never use StarNet or Star Exterminator.
Oh, okay. Why not?
Because StarNet is free, and also for the images that I process, at least, it tends to perform better, especially on like a dense star field, because it performs better on dense star fields.
Got it.
And given that there's a tool like StarNet, I don't think right now, at least, I can justify like a $60 or was it $100 now? It's some expensive purchase when there's basically the same thing as a free tool.
I think it's 80. If I can add, Star Exterminator will also mistake filament structures for stars.
Yeah.
So you can lose details with it, and
Yes.
StarNet doesn't.
Yeah, well, StarNet does have that same problem, but you can get around it by upscale sampling and things like that.
Okay, I encountered it more with the Star Exterminator, though.
Yeah, for sure. But it does work better on irregular stars, so it's a trade-off.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
You got it. Also, the reason we run BlurX on default settings here is because we want the stars to be smaller, so it makes it easier on StarNet when it's removing. But if you do any more sharpened stars, then weird things start to happen in the image.
Assuming this is StarNet version 2, not 1, right?
Yeah, I did a free trial of it like a couple weeks ago because I wanted to retest it, and it still wasn't as good as StarNet for me, at least.
Sure.
So yeah, the important thing after this step is to see what's being over and under subtracted in the specific parts of the galaxy, because overall this is the correct step. Like, this is how you color calibrate. You don't even have to think about the K component. But for something as dynamic as this galaxy, there's going to be regions where you want to subtract more or want to subtract less. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on. That's like one of the main points of this. Because it'll help us show off the H alpha spiral in the center of this galaxy a lot more cleanly. Okay, so that's BlurX. Did a good job with the nebulosity. I mean, like, it's BlurX. What can I say? And then we'll just run StarNet. We don't have to create a star mass though this time.
I'm forwarding a question I saw on the chat, as this will take a bit of time. Someone's asking why you did not check correct first in the BlurX process.
Wait, what? I'm gonna see what correct first did.
I think correct first is a two-pass BlurX process where it will do the stars.
Oh, yeah.
It will deconvolve the stars first and then deconvolve the non-stellar part.
So the reason is, I did a test with a couple of friends for BlurX with all of these. And so for most images, it's really just not needed. I'll start running StarNet as I talk, but it's only if your image is really, really blurred and you need to recover detail that you should run correct first. Otherwise, it's just sort of this expensive computational process that doesn't do much, honestly. Like, BlurX isn't really a scientific process, so correcting the image first, it's not going to give you more scientific value because you're not really gaining anything by doing BlurX in the first place. And it's not making your image look better. It might make you feel better about, like, the technical aspects of your image. But unless the image is, like, really blurred or there's large motion tracking things, I don't really think you need to do correct first. The other important thing to note is that you only want to do noise reduction after the H alpha subtraction. And that's because if you get 0 pixels after you've done noise reduction, it's really annoying to get rid of them. But if you have 0 pixels before you've done noise reduction, it's pretty trivial to get rid of them using MMT or something like that. And plus, then you don't lose twice the detail after subtraction. Okay, so here we go. Thankfully, I was testing this out earlier, and even if I don't click 2x upsample, like, there's barely any data from the H alpha loss. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to actually start to continue subtraction. Pixel math. Okay, so this should do it. And then we're going to just want to create a new grayscale image. And this is what we get. And so this is what I'm talking about in terms of both the gradient and over subtraction. I mean, obviously the image is over subtracted. That's sort of apparent. But there's also this glow on the right and the bottom left, which I feel like if there's a meridian flip, it might have just been amp glow. But the good thing is once we've continued subtracting the image, there's no glow from M31, and so we can safely and pretty quickly remove that glow. But for now, what I'm going to do is draw a preview somewhere here, somewhere I don't know, where I know there's no HA. I'll just get rid of that image. And then we can just change the color calibration reference. Oh, it's going to be super bright now, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. 1 second. Sometimes color calibration will do this. And so we could just use histogram transformation, honestly. But this should be fine. It's not over brightening anything. We'll leave it as it is for now. And the subtraction is still going to work. Okay. Already, this is a better subtraction result, right? But the problem is, even though this may be scientifically correct, there's still this glow here that really hides the pure spiral structure. And so what we're going to want to do is then subtract again, aiming for that spiral structure. And so we can create a new preview over some residual H alpha. Then we can recalibrate and subtract again. And so now here, we can see pretty clearly that the center structure is much, much better. But perhaps it can be subtracted like a tad bit more. And so a preview like this may do the job well enough that we can get a very good subtraction.
You're running color calibration to verify what is and isn't HA, and then doing the subtraction based on that?
So I subtracted once to get an overall idea of where the HA structures were, and then I'm drawing previews where I know the HA structures aren't in different parts of the image, so I can get a better color calibration, so that I can then subtract more correctly, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So now we have our basic, like, 2-ish subtracted images. And if I zoom in to something like over here, it's pretty apparent that the subtraction on the right is far, far better for the outer nebulae, which makes sense. And the subtraction on the inside is far, far better for this individual spiral region, which again makes sense because the continuum slightly differs. But the problem is, how do we model that? And like the easy answer is just saying, well, we can extract loom from this image and then blur it to make a mask. So we're just going to stretch it first really quickly. And then we want to only isolate the very, very large scales. So we're going to use MMT and just probably disable everything below layer like 7. And this is just going to model the overall brightness glow from the galaxy. And then we can use that to model the H alpha. Okay. So then we're just going to use a really simple pixel math equation to blend the two, and then we can use histogram transformation to use our mask later. But what do I call these? What is this one called? Image 25, okay. Okay. So if we run this pixel math, oh, 1 sec. If we run this pixel math, we can see that it just basically fixes the glow of the core. Maybe a little too much, but again, since it fixes it too much, we can just, I think it's going to, if we dim the mask, then it should fix it perfectly. Yeah, and there we go. Maybe I didn't do too much, actually. There's a good bit of trial and error in this. Okay, it's almost like trying to find the K value. But this should be perfect. And now the gradient is really quite apparent in the H alpha image. So we're just going to use like basic. Also, it's cool to see that there is the H alpha pillar right here. That's always hard to get, but it's great to see it in data. Anyway, for DBE, it's really nice because there's no stars and we can see all the nebulae, so we can use big points with large tolerance, which always makes DBE a lot more easy to run. So I think like a 50 default sample radius or tolerance looks good here. And then always subtraction. And so now we're just placing large points where I know there shouldn't be any nebula. And especially around this glow, since we need to get rid of it. The more points we place, the more data Pix has to model a local gradient, and so it's usually good to place a lot of points around a sample like that. But this should be good.
You're gonna add the one for the gradient on the top right.
This one here?
Yeah. No, just below it.
This?
Yeah.
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 The problem is that I know this dust lane has a lot of H alpha. And so it's always a little annoying when there's gradient right above signal. But in this case, since we're using such big points, I think it should be fine. Okay. So, gotten rid of the gradient. It's almost definitely amp glow, actually. Bit of over subtraction in the top right. So if we do like maybe 30, yeah, so a small sample size here, that should work. And just to combat some of the dark values here, we'll do like a 10 sample. There, and then maybe here as well. Okay, and this should be our DBE. This should be a solid DBE. Right? Did this work? Yeah, okay. The DBE did work. So now it's time to noise reduce. So we could noise reduce in a whole lot of different ways, but I think like the most involved way is MMT, and it's always good to learn how to do an MMT denoise on something like this. So first I just create a mask screen transfer function, quite simple. And then you just keep reapplying STF iteratively until it reaches the fixed point. And then all I'll do is just disable the first two layers. That's my noise reduction. And it's a pretty solid noise reduction for the first two layers. We're preserving all the meaningful detail. You're not losing any signal. And then we do that again for layers 3 and 4. And then again, keep iteratively applying until it reaches something like a fixed point. Okay, and so there's a couple good things. One, we've fixed this black central value. And that's because disabling the layer basically fixes so much. And we've also not lost much small scale data, which is really nice. And honestly, you could maybe disable layer 5 for this one, but this is a good enough noise reduction that we can now run NoiseX. Sorry. And the reason I always do MMT before NoiseX is because NoiseX automatically sees like mid-scale noise as signal, and so we'll try to port all the small-scale noise there. But if we just use MMT to remove the mid-scale noise, NoiseX does a far better job. Okay. So now we've just done our basic denoise on the H alpha. So keeping the H alpha in mind, we can now get back to work processing the RGB. We're just going to save all of this here. Okay, and the first thing to do is just stretch the image a lot more after RGB combination. And we really want to be able to see like the outer dust lanes without any loss in contrast. So a stretch like this looks quite good. Okay, and then the next thing to do is apply HDR. And so to do that, we're going to want to protect large scales using an MMT mask. And we'll use that MMT mask throughout the process. So this just means that the larger scale brightness is going to be corrected while we protect the small scale brightness. And I haven't updated Pix yet because apparently all the scripts are going to break. And also, I don't really need much of it, but we'll still do the HSI HDR method. Usually HSI HDR works a lot better. There's only a few reasons why you should use the LRGB or CLIE HDR, and it's mostly for nebulae, which we're not doing now. But we can apply the large scale mask, and then let's just see what HDR looks like. Okay, and the first thing you're going to notice is that there's ringing right here, which means that we've run HDR too low of a scale. So we'll just increase layers to 7, and that should get rid of the ringing. And yes, this does look better. There still is ringing, but it's better overall. So I can do just a quick channel combination. And we can see that the HDR does a very good job of protecting the image. Then to retain local contrast, we're going to do local histogram equalization. Now, I'm estimating that maybe the cool-ish structure is around 80 pixels. And I think like maybe 0.3 6 strength is going to be good for now. And then we'll run it and we'll see what it looks like. Okay. And you can see there's already like way too much ringing in the center, so we need to increase the scales a good amount. Okay, and so now what we can do is a trick that actually Atom Block uses a lot, which is because there's a lot of bright scale ringing, we can just add the min of the image instead of having to worry so much about the bright scale ringing and protection. Like 0.8 times the min. And 0.2 times the max will get us the overall appearance of using LHE without us having to worry about the bright ringing. Oh, what are you doing? Oh, that's what I forgot. Okay, and again, there's a lot of ringing still there.
I think you wanted to put the max as the second
Oh,
function.
yes. Thank you. Forgot about that. And then the second thing we're going to do is actually just blend that with the main image. 0.4, I think. And this should work well. Yep. And so we get just enough to enhance the core. I think maybe if we even do like...
You had, I think you wanted to put 0.8 times the min and 0.2 times the max, and you have times min each time.
That makes sense. Thank you. Okay. That's why I was doing a lot of dark ringing. Right, this is much better. We get the overall protection of the dust lanes here again without having dark ringing. Thank you for that. And again, we can see using channel combination just how good that is. And now the final thing to do is to re-engage the large-scale values just using, I mean, I'll use curves, you can use histogram transformation. And then this just gives the overall illusion that you still have the general bright, like the center is brighter than the core, but you still protect all these dust lanes. So it's a very nice way of protecting everything. Okay, so this is our HDR image. And now the next thing we want to fix is that there are a bunch of cool dust lanes on the bottom right that are dark and they're not really being shown at all. And so we can use exponential transform using the screen mask invert function. Something like this with then histogram and curves is extremely powerful in showing off the lowering dynamic range of the image a lot more clearly. And then we'll do a very slight S-curve to recover some contrast. And then if we do the same process one more time. Oh, that's the wrong process. I think if we run it a little less aggressively this time, it will be good. And then run our curves. Then we see now that we've recovered some brightness in the dust lanes without actually losing much, which is always nice. Okay, so moving on, it's time to even out the color balance and also the brightness balance. So when we re-add the H-alpha, we're going to want a very flat RGB image so that we can show off the H-alpha in the core and on the outsides. So what I'm going to just use is sorry, this MMT mask, and then I'll just lower the histogram, and that will even out the brightness a little bit more. This is just basically like an MMT HDR, and you can do this on different scales, but it is pretty time consuming. Okay. Now it's time for color balance. So when we saturate, we want to target the bright unsaturated regions of the image. And so to do that, we're just going to extract the luminance and then the saturation value and multiply by the inverse. And you can just do that in pixel math. Right, and so this shows us the parts of the image that are bright and unsaturated. And then we can just use curves to increase this. I also am not thrilled about the color of this image. I know it's technically, scientifically correct, but like, if we just lower the green just a tad, and like maybe up the blue a little bit in the image, I think everything would look a little better. But first, we're just going to increase this saturation. And then mask, and then we can do our curves. It's important not to do overall color curves with any sort of mask, because then you're going to get weird brightness ringing artifacts, unless you're very, very, very careful. But something like this, just to make the color a little bit more blue, and then of course an S-curve to recover contrast works. And then we can just saturate a little bit. Just a tad. But the point of this star's image is not really to serve as anything except the base for our H-alpha image, which we are now going to add. Which is right here. So when you add the H-alpha image, you just want to stretch it, of course, in a way that makes the background basically clipped. So we're just going to do this really iteratively. And by background clipped, I mean this background value is 0.08. Sorry. So we're going to just set our shadows at 0.08 and then move on from there. And then maybe slightly lower. Something like this is good. So this is our H-alpha image. And then I already have this pixel math function defined, but all it does is it relinearizes the image and then adds the H-alpha in using slightly different coefficients for each channel. And we'll see that maybe the addition wasn't the best for a couple of reasons. One is it's way too pink. And we can combat that by lowering the blue and the green. And then the second is that we see that either this core is too bright, the H-alpha core here is too dim, or both. But this core being too bright is much easier to fix, and so that's what we're going to work on. And so we'll do the same HDR. Oh, right. But this time we're going to use game to target the core. So we'll open game mask and just add this, maybe about this size. We just want to target the overall glow of the core. And then we can just apply the same HDR. Right, and we might even need to up the scale slightly to 8. Right, and this just deadens the center of the image a little bit more and makes it easier to add the H-alpha. There we go. We're also going to want to brighten the H-alpha slightly more as we add it. So something like this maybe will work a little better. Of course, you can still see the gradient on the left, but that's only expected since I really did a sort of half-hard job. I should have done like 10 iterations of DBA and we only did 5, I think, at most. Okay, and so this is already much, much, much better. Right, we have the local contrast in the core and the H-alpha, but it still feels like everything's a little too bright. So we're going to do one more iteration of our fake HDR, which is to say we're going to dim the image a little bit, and then we're going to apply exponential transformation. And so in this way, we sort of preserve an overall brightness trend, but we set the stage for the real kicker, which is the H-alpha addition. Okay, so now we're at the point where we've added the H-alpha. You can see the pillar, you can see the spirals. All of this nebulosity has been added in really, really well. I mean, this region is so cool with the dust lane reflecting the H-alpha. So now the next step is to add back our stars. That's basically the final step before finishing the image. And this is a little bit of an involved process. So we have our RGB stars, Loom stars, and we're going to stretch, sorry, both a little bit. In this case, we're going to want to stretch the Loom stars first just because they're clipped, and so they're going to determine what we have to do for LRGB combination. And then the images are close enough that I can sort of iteratively do this until it works. And maybe undo one. Yes, this should be a good stretch for both images. And then if you see this little noise around the star, that's not great, and so we can remove that using a really, really slight convolution. Something like this doesn't deaden the star color, it doesn't deaden the star, but it does remove the noise, and then we can do an LRGB combination. Right? And so that seems to have worked well. Now after this, we're going to want to iteratively stretch and saturate. And we can just use this using curves and histogram transformation. Okay, and so now you might be saying, well, like these stars look a little too bright to add to the image, and that is correct. Because what we're going to do is a multi-scale star reduction. A very, very rudimentary multi-scale. star reduction, but one that'll make the image look a little bit better. So if we hit 5 scales, and then remove everything, we should only be left with, oh, I did it the opposite way. We're only left with the mid-scale and small-scale stars. Now, of course, the high-scale stars are also targeted, but to a lesser extent. And so if we just apply that mask and de-stretch a little bit, what we'll get is a much higher variability in star size, which always looks good and can distract from like the strange little addition artifacts and blurx artifacts that we see. Now, before we add, it's always good to see what more curved transformations you can do. So in this case, I think dimming the image slightly really shows off the H alpha a little bit more, and then we can do maybe one more exponential transform. Now, just to brighten the whole image, we'll do it on power and burn pixels, and not too much. Okay, so now we have our starless image and our stars image. And so to do that, we just do this using like the basic relinearization. And we can just apply that process. And this is our finished image. Now, of course, this wasn't the perfect process. There are little things to improve. And I think one thing that we can improve really quickly actually is just the stars are still stretched too much. So just a little HT to bring them down. And then we can do the pixel math again. And that seems to have worked a lot better. But the stars are nicely saturated. They're not too big. They don't overwhelm the image. We've shown off the H alpha in M31 quite nicely while also preserving the balance between like these dust lanes and the H alpha, which is it's a quite nice image. And I think that's basically everything here. But do y'all have any questions?
Will you have the pixel math formulas saved somewhere where we can get them?
I definitely have the H alpha edition and then the linearization ones that I can upload again. The min max one I feel like is pretty simple, and then the subtraction one also should be pretty simple. But if you just like DM me or ping me, I'll be happy to put them up there.
Okay, awesome, thanks.
Yeah, you got it.
Steal from that.
Sorry?
You can just watch the report and just steal the formulas from that.
Gotcha. Anyone else? All right. Yeah, thank you all for coming. This was pretty fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for a cool stream.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, guys. And I'll upload the recording later, too.
Sweet.
All right, I'll see y'all later.
Great. See you later.
Yeah, bye.